And now it's time for our Dvar Torah. So I would like to invite our special guest, our guest scholar, all the way from Toronto to Winnipeg, Yacov Fruchter.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good morning. Kvod Harav, Kvod Chazan. It's really great to be here. Can you hear me okay in the back? You're all right? So, first of all, I want to say that I'm a Montrealer living in Toronto. And still, I think in part because I want you to like me, I'm going to tell you that I'm also married to a Winnipegger, Ryla Bramer. We got married at the Fort Garry Hotel. Thank you. It was almost 14 years ago, but I'll take it. We spend as much of our summers as we can in Winnipeg Beach. One of my kids so far goes to Camp Masad. We're hoping they all follow her. What else? I even know how to get to Gunn's Bakery from here with using Google Maps only minimally. So that's pretty, feels like a pretty big thing. So I feel quite at home here, maybe even an honorary Winnipegger. And still, it has been really lovely being welcomed the way I've been welcomed this weekend. So thank you to the spiritual leadership team, to the board and the synagogue leadership. Even thank you to Phyllis, who welcomed me so lovely this morning at the door, which is such an important piece of how we build community. We begin and end Shabbat every single week by lighting a fire. That's what we do. We light candles at the beginning to bring in Shabbat, and in Havdalah we light a braided candle. So the question that I want to answer with all of you here this morning is, why do we begin Shabbat lighting individual candles and end Shabbat by lighting sort of this one candle, which is made up of many candles intertwined? And in doing so, in answering that question, which I'm only going to do at the end of my talk, so you have to bear with me, I really want to speak about fire. And I want to share 3 stories connected to fire. The first one is that I want to share with you a little bit about the life of Rabbi Kalinamas Kalman Shapira, also known as the Piazetzner Rebbe. Has anyone ever heard of him? Rabbi Shapira? Some nodding yes, mostly no. So he was born in 1889 and became the rabbi of a small town outside of Warsaw called Piazetzno. At the age of, in his early 20s, I believe, he became the rabbi, and within 10 years built up a pretty thriving yeshiva, a place of incredible Jewish learning. Fast forward a few years, and he finds himself as one of the leading rabbis in the Warsaw ghetto. In fact, he is the spiritual leader. And the work that he has to do every day, and especially on Shabbat, is to find a way to bring hope to those in the ghetto. I had the honor of spending 4 years working in the downtown hospitals in the spiritual care department. I'd have to run and be at the bedside with people who were suffering and dying, being with the loved ones of those who recently passed away, trying to care for people. And still, I can't imagine at all what it must have been like for this rabbi to try to care for and to bring hope to people, to our people, in that moment. As he believed his life was coming to an end, and it did, as he was shot as a part of a mass killing in 1943, he took the Divrei Torah, the sermons that he gave during that time, and he put them into a milk canister and buried them in the ghetto. And he wrote a letter that said that if anyone finds this, please send these letters to my brother living in Israel. And that's what happened. Several years later, somebody found them and sent them to his brother. They eventually became published and known as the Esh Kodesh, as the holy fire. And you can read it today. Really painful and beautiful work which tries to bring hope and connection to God in the most unbearable moments. One of his teachings was that if you want to connect with God, with the creator of the world, and with holiness, you must clearly and deliberately slow down. If you want to connect with Hashem, with God, or really with anyone, we need to slow down. I was talking to Gustavo before, and he told me that he's been feeling good this morning, that Shabbat is a different pace for him, an opportunity to slow down. I think those are the words that you used, to act a little differently. And what do we do when we slow down? Well, one of the things we can do is we can connect to each other and we can build community together. Story number 2, also connected to fire, is a story we know well. God hears the cries of our ancestors, of Bnei Israel in Mitzrayim. God hears the cries of those suffering, the slaves, and listens to them and decides to send them a leader. And we know the story of Moshe. And Moshe is in the desert. He has time. He's tending to his father-in-law's sheep. And he notices something. What does he notice? He notices that there's a bush that's on fire. And we often think of that as this incredible moment that Moshe noticed that the bush was on fire. But really, as we know all too well, that forest fires happen all the time, and especially in the desert. They're everywhere. They're threatening our world a lot of the time. So what's so special about him noticing it? Why is that important? Because he actually realizes, according to some of the Midrashim, that something is different here. As the Torah teaches that although this bush was on fire, it wasn't consumed. It stayed whole. Just like the rabbi mentioned about the clothing of our own sons. V'hasneh enenu ukal. The Torah teaches that God is in that fire, but God doesn't speak to Moshe right away. It doesn't happen immediately. Moshe notices that something is different. And he says, I have to figure out what's going on over here. What is this? The Esh Kodesh, the Piazetzner Rebbe, the same rabbi I just spoke about a moment ago, brings the commentary over here that God only speaks to Moshe when we read the words, Vayar Adonai kisar lil'ot. When God notices that Moshe struggles to see. He says, wow, there's something strange here, and I'm not going to just ignore it. I'm going to look closer. And when Moshe turns his head to try to understand exactly what's happening here, Vayikra elav Elohim mitoch hasneh. At that moment, God calls out to Moshe from the burning bush. It was only when he cared enough to pay attention, when he physically took his body and he looked. Friends, that's how we create community. When we notice the little things, the people who didn't come to shul this week, and also the people who are celebrating something. When we notice what is special, when we notice suffering, when we notice joy, things that aren't obvious, but we turn to each other and we try to look. We say, we're not going to ignore this. There's a lot of moments where we want to, but we're not going to. Life is so busy, but we are going to slow down and we're going to pay attention to one another. Story number 3. This is also a reminder that in life, moments of joy and tremendous grief often feel like they're just the other side of the coin. They're so close to each other. We live with both all the time. We just ended Pesach. We're marking Yom HaShoah. Within 24 hours, we then mark both Yom HaZikaron and also Yom HaAtzmaut. So the third story is that Aaron is having the best day of his life. The best day. They just consecrated the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and he blesses the people. So as far as we know, the first moment of Birkat Kohanim, of the priestly blessing, although the words aren't there, but he blesses them. And Moshe comes out and blesses them. And this great fire comes and consumes, in a really beautiful, positive way, their offering. And it is amazing. This is what he lived for. And then the unimaginable happens. Aaron's 2 sons do something, not exactly sure what. And they too are consumed ba'esh, in fire. All we know is that they bring an esh zal, some sort of a strange fire, and then they are consumed in it. Moshe tries in some strange way to console his brother Aaron. Says something that sounds like God wanted them more, or through those he's closest, God brings holiness into the world. And the Torah says, Vayidom Aharon, which we understand to be that Aaron was silent. The order is interesting. We don't know actually how Aaron reacts at first. The Ramban Nachmanides says that Aaron actually wailed. He was weeping. And then Moshe said what he said, and that silenced him. Vayidom is also like Amod Dom, what soldiers do when they're in attention. So perhaps Aaron heard his brother's words, and they just shut him up and shut him down. Instead of comforting him, made him feel like he couldn't say anything at all. Or perhaps he was actually speechless, just resigned to the moment, just let go, and no sound at all came out. Blue Greenberg, who's married to Rabbi Yitz Greenberg and a wonderful author and Jewish educator, lost her son to a horrible bike accident in 2003. And she said that what she learned from these words, from Aaron's response, is that sometimes people say the wrong thing, and this is a reminder to us that when you are dealing with someone who's in mourning, who's in pain, who is suffering, sometimes we just have to be quiet. We ourselves have to be quiet. The Talmud teaches that there is a difference between the way we're supposed to act when we go to a wedding versus when we go to a shiva house. That when we're at a wedding, we're supposed to bring simcha to the chatanim kala, joy to the bride and groom. And how do we do it? The Talmud says, b'milta, with our words, with our song, with telling them how amazing they are, how beautiful they look. But that same piece of Talmud teaches us that in a shiva, how are we supposed to act? How do we bring comfort to those in mourning? Bishtika, with our silence. I understand this to mean not that we can't say a thing, but that we have to follow the lead of those who are mourning. We have to be there, slow down, notice them, notice what they need, and just be there with them in the way that they need us to. I mentioned the next week is Yom HaZikaron, Remembrance Day for fallen soldiers and for victims of terror in Israel. 3 more names were added to the list of victims of terror. Rabbi Leo D., who made Aliyah with his family from Britain in a horrible, really monstrous attack that I'm sure you all heard about, where his 2 daughters, Maya and Rina, and his wife, Lucy, were gunned down. Maya and Rina died right away. And Lucy just passed away early this week, and her funeral was earlier this week. The day before Lucy's funeral, Rabbi Leo D. asked the world, especially the Jewish community, to mark it as D-Day. He didn't ask for silence. In fact, he asked for the exact opposite. He asked for Jews all over the world to post pictures of themselves with Israeli flags. He said that what he needed on that day was a show of unity, a show of connection with Israel and with him. When people are suffering, we have to be there for them in the ways that they need us to be there with them. I'm going to end by answering the question that I started with. So why do we end Shabbat with a braided candle when we begin Shabbat with individual ones? So the answer that I love, although I imagine, because we're Jews, that there are many answers to this, is that Shabbat gives us the chance to slow down, to turn to each other, to be together, to drink some great wine and eat some incredible food. I know I'm keeping you from the Kiddush, and so we'll enjoy that soon. To connect to one another, to be together, to feel that our lives are intertwined. And so when we do it right, and I think we know how to do it, we can end Shabbat not feeling like individuals, but like people, like the Havdalah candle, who are intertwined and who feel responsible and love for one another. Shabbat Shalom.